I remember a number of years ago now, my father saying on the eve of his birthday that he just didn't understand how he could be turning 90 and still feel so alive inside, like he was 18. Never forgot that. And it made me think and still think about what a paradox aging is. On one hand, our physical bodies are constantly changing and less able to do things that they once did. And on the other hand, our hearts and our minds are becoming wiser, maybe finally figuring out how to live in the way we want to. How do we meet this? That's kind of what I keep asking myself. How do we navigate this aging process? And can we hold all of it? Our culture really isn't very supportive of these kind of questions. You know, we share our stories of our aches and pains, but really when we stop for a moment, it's almost heartbreaking to see how we try to hide from aging by distraction or denial. Can you sense that in your life sometimes? I remember being in China many years ago with a group of friends, and we went into a small rural community, and everyone flocked to meet the woman with the gray hair, who at that time was not me. One of our group spoke Chinese and understood that they wanted to know how old this woman was. A question that, of course, we hesitate to ask. When she said she was 75, others who were older proudly said how old they were. The older, the better in this culture. Elders were revered. This isn't so true in our culture. And nature also teaches us the beauty of age. Think about matured trees with wrinkly bark and branches reaching up to the sky. They're considered beautiful and majestic. We celebrate the 1,000-year-old sequoia trees, and we create parks to protect them so we can visit them, like I recently did. And yet, it seems that we become more invisible as we age. At least I've experienced that now and again. So if we want to live wholeheartedly with the way things are, where can we look for guidance and support? The story goes, you might have heard this before, but the story goes that Prince Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, lived in his father's palace for his first 29 years, isolated from the world around him and ignorant of the realities and the hardships of life. His father thought this was the right way to raise and protect his son, who was very sensitive. One day, when Siddhartha escaped the palace and wandered outside its walls, he saw for the first time an old person, a sick person, and a corpse. And these totally shocked and frightened him. He'd never seen or heard of this before. But in that moment, he understood that this was the plight of every human. All will age, become sick, and eventually die. The last person he saw was a monk, and this moved him deeply. These 4 encounters are referred to as the heavenly messengers: aging, sickness, death, and the spiritual path of a monk. The message they're quite boldly offering to us is, yoo-hoo, pay attention. Turn towards this, because this is the way things are, and none of us can escape these things. It's that realization that motivated Siddhartha to leave the palace and begin his search to understand life and suffering in the world. The monk he encountered, the fourth messenger, represented that path for him. So embedded in this story of the heavenly messengers and the inevitability of aging, illness, and death is a really profound understanding of impermanence. Everything's flowing and changing all the time around us and inside us as well. And I know we know it at some level, but do we know it deeply? Really deeply? Can we flow with it without resistance? It's not easy to embrace. The changes that our physical bodies experience are losses. We identify with our bodies in such a personal way, and when they change, we cling to the way we were. It's so difficult to let go of what our bodies once were able to do. Maybe it's hearing loss, could be vision changes, mental acuity or body agility. One place where I feel it is in my body. I love to hike. And I used to hike up New England mountains. I'd go 10 or 12 miles a day, and everything about it, the mountain air, that feeling of exertion, the expansive view, how incredibly good the food tasted when I got to the top, it made me feel totally alive. And I can't do that anymore. But I hold on to the idea that maybe I could again, if I just got myself in better shape. That's how I sometimes try to deny my aging, by pushing myself a little bit. And I don't know, maybe I could train myself to do these hikes again. But the reality is that my body has changed and it's harder. I still hike, lesser distance, slower pace, and I totally enjoy it. But there is a loss there. This happens over and over as our physical bodies change. And finding a balance on that edge of pursuing what we love and what we've always been able to do and accepting our limits, it takes grace. A French mystic and priest, Teilhard de Chardin, speaks of the grace of diminishment. As we age, we find grace in diminishment. Something about that just captures it for me. I looked up the word grace because I use it a lot, but I'm not sure I could define it that well. And one of the definitions is a disposition to show kindness or compassion towards ourselves, towards this process of change that is inevitable. Last week, Catherine spoke of what compassion for ourselves might feel like. And she talked about how maybe it's not always warm, and maybe we're not always actively moving towards something, but it could be a stillness or a deep understanding and allowing. And I really appreciate this permission to have this widening perspective. And I wonder if I can meet aging this way, not by rejecting it, and maybe not feeling warm and fuzzy about it either, but just allowing, finding grace in the diminishment. I know this is what my dad was pointing to when he said that he felt different on the inside, in his heart, than he imagined he would. At 90, he was able to settle into the truth of his aging body and realize he could still feel very alive. he found that grace in the diminishment. And it was a surprise to him. It opened him in a way that I had not experienced with him before. In the last months of his life, he really became softer, more allowing, more demonstrative of his love. You know, it was when he could no longer deny his aging process, he changed. He laughed more, he got choked up more. And it was really wonderful to be with him in those times. I am so glad that he found this place. But we don't have to wait until we're 90, nearing the end of our lives, to open and soften. You know, Bill always says to me, we practice for our old age. This is why we come and sit now. It's really inspiring, I think, to think that way. Karl Pillemer is a sociologist who interviewed over 1,000 elders to ask them their advice for living. They were experts because they were elders who had lived longer than most of us. And one point that was expressed over and over by those interviewed was, being old is much better than you think. Each decade has opportunities that weren't available previously. And finally, they said, aging is opportunity, adventure, and growth. It's a quest, not an end. Thank you all for your attention and for your practice.